The wind howled across the barren landscape of the alien planet, biting through the thin atmosphere and carrying with it a chilling cold. The sky above was a dull gray, the clouds thick and heavy, as though the heavens themselves were burdened with the weight of the world. A vast, unforgiving wilderness stretched as far as the eye could see, nothing but jagged rocks, icy plains, and scattered, twisted trees that seemed to groan in the wind. In the distance, a shape moved, large and dangerous. A wolf, its fur dark as the night, padded silently across the icy ground. Its eyes glowed faintly, a dangerous gleam in the dim light, while its powerful body seemed to blend with the shadows around it. This was no ordinary wolf. It was a creature born of the galaxy's most hostile worlds, known for its brutal strength and deadly instincts. But even the most fearsome creatures of the galaxy have their weaknesses. The wolf's body was stiff with exhaustion, its breath coming in short, labored gasps. Nearby, two small cubs stumbled through the snow, their legs weak and shaking, trying desperately to keep up with their mother. The cubs were young, fragile, and unable to survive the harsh conditions without their mother's strength. But today, the wolf was not strong enough. The wind seemed to mock her, pushing her further into the desolate wasteland. Her journey was nearing its end, and the cold seemed to have already claimed her spirit. Not far off, a group of aliens stood silently, watching from the shadows. These were the ones who had decided the fate of the wolf and her cubs. Their eyes were cold and unfeeling, their expressions betraying no sympathy. The alien leader, tall and imposing, watched the scene with a look of indifference. These creatures were not known for their mercy. In fact, they had abandoned the wolf and her cubs here in the first place, left to die in the unforgiving wilderness. Let them die, the leader had said, his voice a low growl. We need to keep moving. We have no time for the weak. His words were final, and without another thought, the group had turned and walked away, leaving the creatures to their fate. The wolf's once proud form now lay slumped in the snow, her breath shallow and slow. She was so close to the end. Her cubs huddled close to her, their small bodies trembling from the cold, their eyes wide with fear. They didn't understand why their mother was so weak, but they knew they were alone in a world that didn't care. The wind picked up again, cutting through the frozen landscape, and a shadow moved closer. It wasn't one of the aliens, nor was it a threat to the wolf. It was a human, a lone figure stumbling through the blizzard. His clothing was tattered, his face covered in frost, but there was something in his step that showed he wasn't ready to give up yet. He had been stranded on this planet after an accident, left to survive in this hostile environment with nothing but his wits and determination. The human had been wandering for days, trying to find shelter, food, or anything that could help him stay alive. But he had not expected to stumble upon this an abandoned wolf and her cubs, left to die by those who had no more use for them. The human stood at the edge of the snowstorm, watching the scene unfold before him. His heart raced as he observed the poor creatures struggling against the elements. They were weak, their chances of survival slim. He could feel a pull deep within him, a sense of duty and compassion. He had always been taught that life, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, was worth protecting. And now, standing before him, were lives that needed saving. But there was no time to waste. The human's eyes darted nervously toward the distant alien group. They would not hesitate to kill him if they saw him interfering. Still, something in his gut told him he couldn't just walk away. The wolf and her cubs needed him. And so, with a deep breath, he made his decision, taking one last look at the cold, endless horizon. The human took a step forward. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to let them die. The wind howled relentlessly as the human made his way toward the fallen wolf and her cubs. His boots crunched through the snow, each step taking him closer to the creatures that were clinging to life. His heart raced, his breath visible in the freezing air. He had no plan, no preparation, just an instinctual drive that pushed him forward. The wolf's body lay still, her chest barely rising and falling, while the cubs huddled close to her, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Every part of him screamed that this was dangerous. The alien group could return at any moment, and he knew they would not hesitate to end his life if they saw him meddling with what they had abandoned. But the human could not ignore the silent plea in the eyes of the cubs. They were innocent, too young to understand the harshness of the galaxy they lived in. The human's hand trembled as he crouched next to the wolf, feeling for her pulse. The icy wind whipped around him, but he focused on the task at hand. There was still a faint heartbeat tweak, but there. He took off his outer jacket, wrapping it around the cubs, trying to protect them from the cold. The mother wolf needed attention first. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he checked her injuries. She had deep gashes along her side, wounds that looked like they'd been inflicted by the alien predators. He had no medicine, no real tools, but his medical training was enough to know that he couldn't just leave her. The wolf let out a soft growl as he touched her, a warning, but it wasn't aggressive. He spoke softly, his voice steady, trying to comfort her despite the danger. "I'm not here to hurt you," he murmured, though the words felt meaningless in the howling wilderness. The wolf's ears twitched as his hands moved carefully over her body, checking for signs of internal damage. He could feel her pain, and it made him hesitate for a moment. The alien race that had abandoned her was ruthless, and now he was alone with her. Could he save her? Could he protect her cubs? The wind picked up again, colder this time, and the cubs shivered under the human's jacket. He could feel their fragile bodies trembling, their breaths shallow. Time was running out. They needed shelter, warmth, something to give them a chance. He glanced around the landscape. There was no shelter in sight, no sign of safety. They were surrounded by endless snow and jagged rocks. His mind raced. There had to be something he could do. The human knew the aliens were not far off. If they returned and saw him, it was over. They would surely punish him for defying them. But what if he left now? Would these creatures survive? He couldn't live with the guilt of walking away, leaving them to die. With no more time to think, the human scooped up one of the cubs and wrapped it tightly in his jacket. He stood, determination in his eyes, and moved toward the ship wreckage he had spotted earlier in his search for shelter. It wasn't much, but it was better than the open, merciless wilderness. The wolf followed him weakly, dragging her injured body along, her movements slow and labored. But she was alive, still fighting to survive. The cubs looked up at him, their eyes full of trust, and he knew there was no turning back now. His feet were numb, his body exhausted, but his resolve burned bright. He would get them to safety. He would protect them, no matter the cost. As the human trudged through the snow, his thoughts were consumed with the weight of the decision he had just made. He wasn't just saving a wolf and her cubs, he was challenging the cruel alien race, defying their cold indifference to life. And he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of something far greater than he could ever have imagined. The human's breath was coming in ragged gasps now, the cold biting into his skin. But he couldn't stop. The wolf and her cubs were depending on him, and the alien shipwreck he had found was still a long way off. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he trudged through the unforgiving landscape, the wind howling like a wild animal, relentless and cruel. The cub he carried in his arms had stopped shivering, its tiny body too exhausted to fight the cold anymore. He wrapped the jacket tighter around it, trying to keep it as warm as possible. The wolf, though weaker than before, limped behind him, her steps slow and deliberate. The wreckage wasn't far now, but the journey felt like an eternity. Every minute seemed to stretch into hours as the harsh winds and freezing temperatures battered them. The human glanced back at the wolf. Her strength was fading, and her movements were becoming sluggish. He could see the pain in her eyes, but she kept pushing forward. She was determined to survive, just as he was. The cubs, still weak but alive, clung to each other for warmth. The human could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. His mind raced, wondering what the aliens would do if they found him now. Would they let him go, or would they take vengeance on him for defying their will? He didn't know, and he couldn't afford to think about it. Not now. The wreckage came into view at last, an old, half-destroyed ship that had crashed long ago. Its twisted metal frame lay half buried in the snow, but there was enough space inside to shelter them from the wind. The human quickened his pace, desperate to reach it before it was too late. His heart was pounding in his chest, not just from the physical exertion, but from the fear of what might be waiting for them. He had no weapons, no defenses, just his wits and the small medical supplies he had left. He was out of his depth, but he couldn't afford to fail. As he reached the ship, He helped the wolf into the entrance first, guiding her with the same careful touch he had used earlier. She collapsed inside, exhausted but alive. The cubs, still weak, followed, their steps unsteady, but they were with him. They were safe for now. He quickly set to work creating a small fire from the wreckage, using what little he could find to get a flame going. The warmth was a welcome relief, though it wasn't enough to fully push back the bitter cold that still clung to them. Once the fire was lit, he turned his attention back to the wolf. She was lying on the cold metal floor, breathing heavily, her eyes half closed. The human knelt beside her, checking her wounds once more. The gashes were deep, and she was losing blood. He had no anesthesia, no proper medical equipment, but he had to do what he could. Gently, he began to clean the wounds with what he had, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. He could feel the wolf's pulse, faint but steady, and it gave him a sliver of hope. She was still alive, still fighting. The cubs, now curled up near the fire, watched him with silent eyes. Their tiny faces were filled with curiosity and uncertainty, but they knew they were safe for the moment. The human couldn't help but wonder what kind of future they would have. Would they grow up to be like their mother, fierce and deadly? Or would they remain fragile, dependent on others to protect them? He couldn't answer that yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He would do whatever it took to keep them alive. As the fire crackled softly, the human let out a long, slow breath. They were safe for now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The aliens might not have killed him yet, but it was only a matter of time before they found out what he had done. The weight of his decision felt heavier with each passing second. Still, he had made his choice, and there was no going back. He would protect these creatures, no matter the cost. The stillness of the wreckage felt unnatural, almost suffocating. The human could hear the crackling of the fire, but his mind was far from calm. He watched the wolf, her labored breathing filling the silence between them, her eyes half closed in exhaustion. The cubs, huddled close to the warmth of the fire, had fallen asleep, their tiny bodies still trembling, but safe for now. He allowed himself a brief moment to relax, but the weight of their situation hung over him like a storm cloud. The wind howled outside the wreckage, a constant reminder of the danger that still surrounded them. His gaze flickered to the entrance of the ship, where the cold, endless expanse of the alien planet stretched out. Somewhere, out there, the alien group was watching. He couldn't shake the feeling that they knew what he had done. The question wasn't if they would come for him, it was when Dot as the human sat there, lost in thought. He heard a noise. It was faint at first, just a whisper carried by the wind, but it quickly grew louder. The sound of something approaching. His heart skipped a beat. He stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for the small knife he had. Though it was no match for the alien forces, his pulse quickened as he peered through the cracks in the wreckage, scanning the horizon. It was too quiet. No footsteps, no voices, just the sound of the wind and the growing hum of something far off. His mind raced. Had the aliens found him already? Were they coming for the cubs, for the wolf? Or was it something worse, an even greater threat than the ones who had abandoned them? The human's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden soft growl of the wolf. She was awake now, her body shifting as she slowly tried to rise to her feet. The pain was evident in her movements, but there was something else in her eyes, a glimmer of alertness. The human immediately knelt beside her, trying to reassure her with a gentle touch. He could feel her body trembling under his hands, but she wasn't about to give up. She was strong, in her own way, just like him. Suddenly, the distant noise grew clearer. It was the sound of engines, alien engines, their deep hum vibrating through the air. The human's stomach twisted. They were coming. The question was how soon, and what did they want? The wolf let out a low, almost imperceptible growl. It wasn't a warning to the human. It was a warning to the outside world. Her instincts were sharp, and she knew that danger was near. The human glanced at the cubs, still asleep near the fire, unaware of the looming threat. He had to act quickly. He wasn't ready to face the aliens, not yet. They were too powerful, too merciless. His eyes darted to the entrance again, and he knew there wasn't much time left. He had no plan, no backup. It was just him, a wounded wolf, and two helpless cubs. But there was something else, something deep inside him that refused to give up. His training, his instincts, His humanity, they all came together in that moment. "Stay quiet," he whispered to the wolf, as though she could understand. But he didn't need to say anything aloud. She had already sensed the danger, and with a surprising amount of strength, she slowly stood, her body trembling with every movement. The human hurriedly pulled the cubs closer to the fire, covering them with more layers of his jacket. He needed to keep them warm, to keep them safe, even if it was only for a little while longer. There was no telling what the aliens would do, but he couldn't let them harm the creatures. They had already been abandoned once. They wouldn't be abandoned again, not while he still had breath in his body. The wind outside roared again, and the hum of the engines grew louder. It was time. Time to make a choice. Time to face whatever came next. The human's hand tightened around the small knife in his grip. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, but he couldn't let it stop him. Not now, not when the lives of these creatures were in his hands. He wasn't about to let them die again, not on his watch. With a steady breath, he turned to the wolf and her cubs, silently vowing to protect them, no matter what. The low hum of the approaching alien engines grew louder with each passing moment, vibrating through the wreckage of the old ship. The human's pulse quickened. He glanced at the wolf, who was now standing with a painful effort. Her amber eyes locked on the entrance as if she sensed the approaching danger. Her body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the looming threat that was drawing closer. The cubs remained curled up, still unaware of what was coming. But the human couldn't afford to let them stay in the dark for long. He was running out of time. He moved quickly, gathering what little supplies he had left. His mind raced, calculating their options. Escape was impossible. The aliens had superior technology, and the human knew their ships could catch him in an instant if he tried to flee on foot. There was nowhere to hide on this desolate planet, no escape. With no choice left, the human turned to the wolf. Her body was still weak, but her eyes had a fire in them, a primal determination. She wasn't ready to die yet, not without a fight. The human could see it in the way her muscles tensed, in the low growl that rumbled in her throat. She had been abandoned, left to die, but now she had something to fight for. He could feel the same sense of resolve burning within him. They were in this together, and together, they would stand against whatever came through that door. The human carefully moved towards the fire, stoking the embers to keep the warmth alive. He needed the cubs to stay asleep, to stay safe. With one final glance at the wolf, he gently covered them with another layer of his jacket, ensuring they were as protected from the cold as possible. They were too young to understand the dangers around them, but the human's protective instincts were sharp. He would not let them suffer. The engines outside were almost deafening now, the vibration shaking the walls of the wreckage. He could hear the footsteps of the alien soldiers as they disembarked, their heavy boots crunching in the snow. The human held his breath, heart pounding in his chest. They were close to close. There was no time for hesitation. Through the small gap in the wreckage, he could just make out the outlines of the alien figures. Their silhouettes were massive, towering over the landscape, their armor reflecting the pale light of the frozen world around them. The human could see their weapons slung at their sides, alien technology, beyond anything he had ever encountered. This was it. The leader of the group stepped forward, tall and imposing. His eyes were cold and calculating, and his mouth curled into a cruel smile as he surveyed the wreckage. The human could feel his presence like a shadow over him. The leader's gaze shifted toward the wolf, who stood protectively near her cubs, her posture tense. "You shouldn't have interfered," the leader's voice echoed, his tone heavy with disdain. "This is not your fight." The words sent a shiver down the human's spine. He could hear the finality in the alien's voice. But there was also something else, something that hinted at a deeper plan. The human clenched his fist, his knuckles white against the cold. There was no turning back now. He didn't have the luxury of being afraid. His gaze locked with the alien leader's, and for a brief moment, he saw something in the leader's eyes, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even respect. The alien wasn't used to being defied. The human had made a choice, and now there was no undoing it. With a deep breath, the human stepped forward. "These creatures have done nothing to you," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "You left them to die. I won't let that happen." For a moment, the alien leader didn't respond. The wind howled again, and the silence between them seemed to stretch on for eternity. Then, with a quick motion, the leader signaled for his troops to stand down. The human felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly extinguished when the leader spoke again. "You are brave, human," the alien said, his voice cold as ice. "But you are also foolish. You think you can protect them? You think you can stop what's coming?" The human held his ground, his eyes never leaving the leader's. "I can protect them as long as I have to," he said quietly. "And I won't stop until they're safe." The alien leader's smile faded, replaced by a look of calculation. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of the moment settling in. It was clear that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The human had made his stand, and now it was a battle of wills. Would the aliens show mercy, or would they destroy everything the human had fought for? The human didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let them win. The silence that followed felt like a suffocating blanket. The human stood frozen, his breath slow and steady, trying to keep his mind sharp. The alien leader's words had hung in the air, their weight pressing against him like a heavy force. The tension between them was palpable, each moment stretching out in a way that felt almost unbearable. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw a glimmer of hesitation in the leader's eyes, but it quickly vanished, replaced by cold determination. The wolf remained standing, her posture rigid as she kept a watchful eye on the aliens. Her injuries were still severe, but her instincts had not dulled. The cubs, nestled in the warmth of the human's jacket, stirred slightly, oblivious to the dangerous game unfolding around them. The human knew that he had just bought himself a moment, a brief window of opportunity. But it wouldn't last long. The alien group was clearly sizing him up, their gazes flicking from him to the wolf and back. Their weapons, gleaming with alien technology, were at the ready, but they hadn't raised them yet. It was almost as if they were waiting for him to make a move. He didn't know what they expected, but he wasn't about to play into their hands. The human's eyes darted around the wreckage, looking for any advantage. There was nothing here, no tools, no backup, no reinforcements. He was alone, but there was one thing he did have: his will, his determination. He had survived countless challenges before, and he wouldn't back down now. As he stood there, locked in a standoff with the aliens, the leader spoke again. "You've made your choice, human," he said, his voice filled with both amusement and threat. "But it is not your decision to make. You cannot save them. Not from us." The human swallowed, his pulse quickening, but he kept his voice steady. "I'll die before I let you harm them." The alien leader's gaze narrowed, studying him with the kind of scrutiny that made the human feel as if he were being weighed, measured, and found wanting. But the human stood tall, his stance unwavering. The wolf's eyes locked with his for a brief moment, a silent understanding passing between them. They were in this together now. The leader raised a hand, signaling to his soldiers. "Take them," he ordered, his voice sharp. In an instant, the aliens moved swift, precise, and deadly. The human's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. He reached down and grabbed a piece of broken metal from the wreckage, a makeshift weapon, something to defend himself with. He knew it wasn't enough, but he had to try. The wolf growled low, her body tensing, ready to spring into action. The cubs were still too weak to defend themselves, but they could feel the danger. Their eyes wide with fear, the human's mind raced. He couldn't fight them all. The alien soldiers were too strong, their technology far superior to anything he had. But he had something they didn't, something they couldn't predict. He had the element of surprise. With a swift motion, the human dashed toward the wreckage's entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the aliens following, their heavy footsteps echoing behind him. But he didn't look back. He had no time to waste. He had to get the wolf and cubs to safety. He reached the outside of the wreckage, the cold air slapping against his face, but it was a blur in his mind. The vast, snowy wasteland stretched out before him, and in that moment, he realized just how truly isolated they were. There was nowhere to hide, no place to run. The human's breath came faster, his thoughts scattered as he raced toward the edge of the wreckage. He had no plan. All he could do was keep moving. Behind him, the aliens were closing in, their voices booming as they shouted orders, but the human was undeterred. He wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. The wolf followed him, her movements slower but still purposeful, her body barely holding together as she moved. The cubs were close behind, their tiny paws struggling to keep up. They were all too weak, but they were alive, and that was enough. In that moment, the human made a decision. He would fight for them, no matter what it took, even if it meant facing down the might of a powerful alien race. As the first of the alien soldiers rounded the corner of the wreckage, the human turned, determination blazing in his eyes. He would not let them take the wolf or her cubs. He would not let them destroy what little hope they had left. His heart beat in sync with the tension that filled the air. This was the moment of truth, and he was ready. The cold wind bit through the human's skin as he stood firm, his back pressed against the jagged wreckage. His pulse thundered in his ears, and every breath he took felt like it could be his last. The aliens were closing in, their steps heavy on the snow, their figures growing larger as they advanced. But the human didn't flinch. He wasn't going to give up, not now. Not when the wolf and her cubs were still counting on him. Behind him, the wolf stood protectively over her cubs, her body still trembling, but her stance unwavering. Her amber eyes locked on the advancing aliens, a low growl rumbling in her throat. She was weak, but there was no question that she would fight for her cubs. The human could feel her resolve, shared, fierce, and determined. In this moment, they were no longer strangers, no longer two beings from different worlds. They were allies, united by the will to survive. The human gripped the makeshift weapon tightly, his knuckles white. It wasn't much, just a jagged piece of metal he had found from the wreckage, but it was all he had. He could hear the aliens now, their voices cold and commanding. "Step aside, human," the alien leader's voice echoed through the desolate landscape. "You cannot win. Surrender now." The human's jaw clenched. There was no way he would surrender, not after everything he had been through. He had made his choice, and there was no going back. He wasn't just fighting for his own life anymore. He was fighting for the wolf, the cubs, and for the idea that compassion could exist even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. He had made an impossible choice, but now, in the face of overwhelming odds, he had to stand by it. The alien soldiers closed the distance between them. Their weapons hummed with energy, but the human didn't move. He didn't need to. His eyes never left the alien leader, whose cruel smile had faded, replaced by something darker. The leader seemed to calculate his next move, his eyes flickering between the human and the wolf. And then, without warning, the human lunged forward, his makeshift weapon raised. The wolf charged right behind him, her powerful legs carrying her with surprising speed despite her injuries. The alien soldiers raised their weapons, but the human was already in motion, dodging their attacks, his instincts guiding him through the chaos. Every step felt like it was happening in slow motion, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He swung the jagged metal at the nearest alien soldier, catching him off guard. The alien staggered back, but the human wasn't done. He pressed forward, using everything he had left to keep them at bay. The wolf was right beside him, her growls filling the air as she fought with primal ferocity, her fangs flashing in the pale light. The cubs, still weak, huddled behind the wreckage, their small bodies protected by the warmth of the fire. For a moment, it seemed like the human and the wolf were a single force, an unstoppable pair. They moved in sync, each anticipating the other's next move. But the alien leader wasn't finished. He raised his hand, and the remaining soldiers fired, their weapons crackling with energy. The human's heart skipped a beat as the shots rang out. But at the last moment, the wolf lunged, taking the brunt of the blast meant for him. She let out a sharp yelp as she was thrown back, but she didn't fall. She pushed herself up, more determined than ever, her body bleeding, but still alive. The human's heart clenched in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. He dashed forward, knocking aside the remaining soldiers with every ounce of strength he had left. His body ached, his vision blurry, but he couldn't stop. Not now. With a final surge of energy, the human closed the distance between him and the alien leader. The leader raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the human disarmed him with a swift, calculated move. The leader staggered back, surprised by the human's speed and ferocity. The human stood over him, panting heavily, his chest rising and falling with each breath. His eyes were wild, filled with a primal fire. "You've lost," the human said, his voice low but steady. "You've abandoned them once. You're not taking them again." The alien leader, though clearly taken aback, didn't show fear. Instead, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the human had proven something. Something that neither he nor his soldiers had expected. In the quiet that followed, the wind howled again, but the human didn't move. He glanced back at the wolf, who had managed to rise to her feet, her eyes locking with his. They were both exhausted, bruised, and battered, but they had done it. They had won. The cubs, still safe by the fire, looked up at their protector with wide, trusting eyes. The human smiled, the weight of the battle still pressing on him, but a deep sense of fulfillment filling his heart. They were safe, for now, and that was all that mattered. As the alien soldiers retreated, their leaders silent in defeat, the human stood tall, his heart still racing, but his resolve stronger than ever. He had faced the darkness of the galaxy and emerged victorious. The future was uncertain, but in this moment, they had all found a new beginning.